Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Why do people say one thing and do another? What really drives behavior? How does the brain actually work, and how can we best communicate with it? What does this mean for companies, for small businesses? Melina Palmer, host of the Brainy Business Podcast, is going to be our guest today, and we are going to do a deep dive into the subject of behavioral finance, behavioral economics, one of our favorite topics on the show. But as always, we usually reserve just the first few minutes of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Houston and the Gulf Coast area when it comes to financial literacy. So we are here in September of 2018, and we are kicking off Houston Money Week 2019. Now, if you are a longtime listener, you've heard me talk about Houston Money Week before, but we already are getting ramped up and getting started for the event that takes place in April of 2019. I would encourage people to log on to Houston Money Week's website, which is houstonmoneyweek.org. As even though the event takes place in April, many of the partners, nonprofits, for-profits, community, local government, universities, schools, all of these different partners participate in Houston Money Week, and they also have events that take place throughout the year. The thing about these financial education talks is they are free, they are open to the public, and so just if there's one that comes up near you that it's a topic that you're interested in, by going to that website, you should be able to see the calendar. If you are an organization that would like to become a partner, our meetings are taking place. The first one that we're going to have for the 2019 year is going to be on September 20th. That will be at the United Way. You can find out more information about that by going to houstonmoneyweek.org. With that, we also have some news here at KPFT. We are entering once again the board election that will be coming up very soon here. So I wanted to encourage people, if you want to become a board member or you want to nominate somebody to the board, to make sure to renew your membership here at KPFT. You can find out more information about that. We have a big icon on the splash page if you log into kpft.org, and you'll be able to find out more information on how to become involved with that. With that, let's go ahead and get Melina on the line here. Melina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Well, I usually start the show the same way. I'll share a little bit about you to the listeners. Now, you also have a podcast called the Brainy Business Podcast, which I've got on there lots of good information. I encourage people to go and look at that as well. Melina, you were a graduate from the University of Washington's Global Honors Program with a degree in business, and your senior thesis was presented at the Association of Consumer Research Symposium in India. You are a lifelong learner. She went on to pursue a master's degree in behavioral economics from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology and conducted research projects on improving savings behavior using simple nudges. So this is one of our favorite topics to talk about on Money Matters, and so I'm excited to get to really get into this with you. For listeners who aren't familiar with behavioral economics, can you tell us a little bit about what this is?
Absolutely, and thank you for the great introduction. I appreciate it. For me, whenever I speak on this topic, whether I'm out at a conference or when I talk about this on the podcast, the easiest association I can make for people is basically to say if traditional economics and psychology had a baby, you would end up with behavioral economics. And essentially what has happened is that people were realizing over time that there was a problem with traditional economics in that its models did not accurately predict behavior because it assumed logical people making rational choices. And unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in. So you end up with a lot of behavior that doesn't align with the way that a model thinks someone should act. So over time, economists and psychologists started either working together or stepping into one another's fields, and this new field of behavioral economics was born out of that. And it was really looking for the trends, to see if there were common threads or concepts or things that we could use to more accurately predict behavior. And the good news is that while people are illogical and irrational, their behavior is very predictable.
What can you tell us about the brain that we need to know before we have a discussion about finance or economics?
I always like to start with letting people know about how our brains actually work, because even though we all have brains, it turns out we really don't know a lot about how they actually work. So anytime you think about your own brain, if you were to think about something that your brain would do or a time when you're considering your brain, you're really in this state of thinking about thinking, which is the conscious part of the way that your brain does processing. And just as a side note, for anyone who is familiar with behavioral economics, I use the simplified terms of conscious and subconscious when I talk about this, because instead of System 1 and System 2 from Kahneman or something along those lines, just because I think it's easier for people to relate to. So your conscious brain is that cognitive processing space. And anytime you can think about thinking, anything you can really relate to of what your brain does is that conscious space. And we know that our brain processes things subconsciously, but we don't really realize how much it does. And the highest study that I've ever seen on this had it listed at 99.999% of our brain's processing being subconscious. And for any naysayers, the lowest I've seen is 95%. So I like to just sort of split the difference and call it 99%. So if 99% of your brain's processing is done subconsciously and you don't know what it's doing because our conscious and subconscious brains don't really talk to each other, it can cause this sort of a disconnect because you don't know what you're doing or what your brain is doing. So the subconscious acts like a filter or the gatekeeper. It's like the receptionist in the office, that it is constantly scanning the environment around you and basically saying normal, 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 using rules of thumb to make decisions. And then it will stop and sort of raise a flag and say, hey, that's weird. Conscious brain, you should do something now. And that's when we feel like we're doing something with our brain, we're taking an action. But that subconscious is processing tons and tons of information very quickly and not even alerting our conscious brain of what it's making decisions about. If you were to think about it like a computer, which a lot of people like to make that association, it's been said that your subconscious brain can do approximately somewhere in the 11 million bits per second of processing information, which is a ton. You've got so much that you're processing all the time. And your conscious brain can process about 40, period. Not 40,000 or anything compared to that 11 million, which is a huge disparity, a very large gap. And so all this other stuff is really happening behind the scenes and underneath the surface of what you're consciously aware of, and it's making really all of your decisions in a lot of behavior and especially in buying behavior.
Now, I know when we talk about behavioral finance, one of the terms that comes out is loss aversion. What can you tell us about loss aversion?
Oh, absolutely. I actually have an entire episode dedicated to loss aversion. It's episode 9 of the podcast. And essentially, human beings don't like to lose things, which is not really surprising, I think, to any of us when you hear it. But the issue we've come up with is in our society, we've really built this system around gains to where we've basically said, people like to have things, so we should give them more things, is sort of the way we've interpreted this displeasure of losing things over time as a society, where you end up with loyalty programs or reward cards or, swipe your card at the financial institution and you get points or whatever it is. And what happens is that perceived gain, it actually takes, studies have shown in numerous applications that it takes double the joy felt by a gain to equal the pain you feel from a loss. So essentially, losing $20, you would need to find $40 to feel whole, which even in that scenario, I think most of us would maybe feel even a little bit worse from losing, $20 or $200, whatever it happens to be. So what happens is we don't like to lose things, and it can be a very strong motivator. It ties in closely with another concept in behavioral economics of perceived ownership, which our brains claim ownership over things almost instantly, especially if you factor in power of your other senses, like touch and things like that, can make it to where your brain has latched on and decided that it owns that particular item and doesn't want to let it go. I talk a lot on the podcast about how our brains are essentially like small children. If you've ever seen kids playing and, they might have 15 toys in front of them and be playing with one and not really care about a toy on the periphery until someone comes up and tries to take it, and then it's instantly their favorite toy in the whole world, and they can't bear to lose it. That's really what our brain is using, that same logic when it's making decisions all the time when it comes to loss aversion.
That sounds like when you buy a car and they let you test drive it, or what they say, the puppy dog clothes.
Absolutely. I have that example in my ebook and I talk about it all the time, that perceived ownership is really, especially with an overnight test drive. So with any sort of a test drive, you get somebody in the car, they're a lot more likely to buy it. But then there's this extra step that a lot of dealerships have started doing where you can take the car home. And as a consumer, you think, wow, that's so nice of them. They're letting me take this car, and I could crash it, and I don't owe them anything. I haven't bought it yet. And they might even give you a gift card to go take the family out to dinner, and they would say, see how it fits in the garage, and make sure the car seats fit, and all those things. And you think they're being nice, but in reality, taking that car home, seeing it in your space, really touching and living with it, will make it so your brain is claiming so much ownership over that thing, it couldn't possibly bear to lose it. And then suddenly your regular car, which you thought was fine the day before since you weren't ready to buy yet, now it looks really terrible compared to this amazing new car that your brain has claimed ownership over and doesn't want to lose.
So that's something very practical as a consumer, as somebody who is frugal. If you're going to purchase a car or something along the lines, if you see this tactic, there are some hardwired things that we're fighting against when we're going to purchase vehicles. So this is good. And I know, and also you've written before about tips for better back-to-school shopping and things like that. So a lot of these principles we can turn around and apply to our daily lives when it comes to protecting ourselves as consumers. Let's talk about a different thing when it comes to consumer finance called availability. What does that mean?
So availability is this association your brain makes where it puts extra weight on things that it's heard of before. So things that you hear of all the time, you will have a stronger association with and think they're more likely to happen. So if I was to show, when I talk about this in my presentations, I will often show, I'll pop up a picture of a shark. So when you think of a shark, what words, come to mind for you?
I think of Jaws, the movie Jaws.
Right. And shark attacks, and I hear, blood or teeth or biting, things like that are the words that we have associated with the term of a shark or a picture of a shark. And then I pop up a picture of a cow with its big brown eyes looking at you, so nice and kind. And, the words that come up from that are typically milk or farm or, petting zoo, or, someone usually makes a joke about hamburgers. And then almost inevitably someone says, "Aw," because they're so cute. We love cows, right? But what has happened for us is we've made this association through availability that all we ever hear about sharks is about them being these vicious killing machines. Essentially, that's the only time they make it into the news and all of that. And so we think that they are more dangerous or deadly to us, but in reality, less than one person a year is killed by a shark, but there are 22 cow-related deaths in the United States every year. So this strange association that our brain makes you think that that's what happens because you have all these tie-ins to the shark being vicious and attacking Shark Week, things like that, versus the cow, which we take our kids to go see them. It's one of the first words we learn when we're children, and you have this other association. Similarly, if you were to think about this in an aspect like texting and driving, you may know that it's dangerous and that you shouldn't do it and that could happen, but you have all these times where you've never had a problem yourself, and so your brain is associating this bringing up what the actual danger would be for you is sort of associated differently based on your experience and how readily that comes available to you. Actually, another really relevant example for right now is that people are more likely to get flood insurance immediately following a flood. And then there's a lot of time goes by, there hasn't been one, so you say, "Oh, I don't need that," and that's when the next flood comes around, and then you add it back in. So once you have this association or something with a hurricane that you think, "Oh, now I should do this disaster preparedness," or whatever, you have all this new example that influences your behavior after something has happened, which is usually not the right time to take that action.
Right. A little bit too late at that point now.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Well, so there are other terms that I wanted to talk about as well when it comes to financial behaviorism, financial economics. There's anchoring and adjustment. What is anchoring and adjustment?
This is one of my favorite concepts, and one of my very favorite studies is a really great example of this concept. So in a grocery store environment, they had two different end cap displays that they were testing this concept out on, and they basically were exactly the same. There was just one word difference between the two. So on the one, it said, "Snickers bars, buy them for your freezer." And the other says, "Snickers bars, buy 18 for your freezer," which is, I think pretty much everybody can agree, 18 is a lot of Snickers bars. That's not a normal purchase behavior. And you would probably think it doesn't have much impact on you. And if you were on the side of the business that's putting that out there, you might not want to put arbitrary numbers or things like that. But what actually happened in that study was a 38% increase in the purchase of Snickers bars when the number 18 was used instead of the word them. And the reason that happens is if you're walking through the store and you see the sign with the word them, maybe it flashes onto your radar, but because your subconscious is filtering through so much information, you might not even really think about it consciously. It might not flag you. And then you think, "Oh, okay, I'll get 2 or maybe 3 because, them is plural, whatever it happens to be, and you throw a couple in the cart. And then in the other scenario, if you're walking through, that 18 is a number that makes your brain sort of stop and go, whoa, that's a lot of Snickers. Have I not been buying enough, or what is that, right? And you stop, and your brain essentially says, 18? I'm better than all those other people that would get 18 Snickers bars. I'll just get 6. And so the anchor that got set, that high anchor, is now a point that you're going to adjust down from. And our brains do this all the time. So another retail type of example, or in a grocery store, would be you're more likely to buy a higher quantity of items if like cans of soup, for example, if they're listed at 10 for $10, you will buy more than if they're listed at $1 each.
And you see that quite a bit in the grocery store there.
Yes, absolutely. You do, because they know that it works. They might not have known this association in the brain and what happens with that, but that anchor gets set there, and it can have a really huge impact on the way that you're making buying decisions, especially if you're in sort of an overwhelmed state. And our brains get bogged down and overwhelmed really quickly and easily. And so especially if you're trying to remember a lot of information. So if you are going to a grocery store and you're trying to remember your list in your head, I would strongly advise against it. If you're trying to restrict your impulsive and irrational behaviors when you're in the store, where you might be more likely to just grab, 6 and stock up instead of just getting the 2 cans that you went in to get of soup. If you're trying to remember everything, you're essentially using up that conscious space, so then your subconscious can just run rampant and make all the decisions that it wants to make. There was a study done where they had people remembering. One group was asked to remember a 2-digit number, and the other group was asked to remember a 7-digit number, and then they sort of went through a series of rooms and had a few tasks, and then were supposed to recite their number on the other side. The people remembering the 2-digit number, when asked for what snack they wanted, were more likely to choose fruit salad. And the people remembering the 7-digit number, which is only 5 additional numbers, so we would think our brain must be able to handle that capacity, those people were more likely to choose chocolate cake when they were offered a snack. And it's because their conscious brain was really tied up with trying to keep repeating those 7 digits, just those extra 5 numbers, used up that cognitive conscious processing power. Those 40 bits per second were really focused on this. And so subconscious said, cake, I want that. And they ended up making a worse choice.
Wow. So low bandwidth, and it takes the path of least resistance there, chocolate cake.
Yes, absolutely. Our brains are very lazy. They've got a lot going on, but they love to use those rules of thumb. And a lot of times they make sense when you actually understand the root of these concepts of where it's coming from, why it would make that choice. But in actual behavior, it's not always the best for us.
So there's another term, relativity, and I think we know what relativity is, but how is relativity when we're talking about it from behavioral finance?
So relativity goes out, basically like the peanut butter and jelly with anchoring and adjustment and relativity, they go very well together. And as I said, I have an episode dedicated to loss aversion on the podcast, and I also have an episode of that's dedicated to anchoring and adjustment, and one on relativity as well. So those are all available at thebrainybusiness.com. But with relativity, our brains can't process or value one-off items, and they need something to be able to make a comparison in order to make a decision. So this is a point where if you don't have a comparison point, you might delay and think, I'll look at that later, because you need to know how something compares against other things to be able to know if it's a good value or not. So if, for example, let's say you owned a small electronics store and you decided that you're going to start carrying espresso machines and you don't have any in the store, you get one that you think is really good value. It's $150. You put it on the shelf next to a blender and a microwave, and for 6 months it sits there and nobody buys it. And you would probably think either, one, nobody wants espresso machines, I should just get rid of these and, call it a day, or sell them at a really high discount to get rid of them, which, again, neither of those are actually the right choice. What you should do, the problem is there's nothing to compare it to. So you would want to get another espresso machine that is double the size and twice the price and have it sitting right next to it, but to look as close in style as possible as you can. And then what that does, somebody will come in and say, oh, wow, what a great deal. You know, I've thought that maybe I should get off of, $5 cups of coffee every day. Maybe I should invest in the espresso machine. And look, this is so compact, and it's a great introductory model, and maybe someday I'll step up to the $300 model, but, that'll look great in my kitchen. Your brain is able to make this comparison, and then your conscious will sort of logic you into moving forward with a choice that your subconscious already made.
What about the term of scarcity? How does scarcity relate to behavioral finance?
Scarcity is another time it's sort of tied in with that loss aversion and perceived ownership, and also very closely tied in with availability. Interestingly, next week's episode is dedicated to scarcity, so you just know exactly what's happening here. So scarcity is that if we know there's only one of something or there's a limited quantity, anytime you see the language of custom or exclusive, act now, don't wait, hurry. If you have ever noticed when you go to book, say, airline tickets, and they say that there are only 2 left at this price, you feel an urgency, like, oh my gosh, I have to act on that right now because it's going to be gone. There are only 2, and there could be millions of people trying to buy this seat right now. And if that little number wasn't there in front of you, you wouldn't feel the same urgency to have to buy because that loss aversion and that scarcity tactics don't factor in the same way. So bringing that to your brain's attention in that case, that's where then your subconscious sees that and says, oh no, flag, hey, conscious, buy this, we can't wait, there aren't enough of them left, we're going to miss out. And that fear of missing out, FOMO, as the kids call it these days, is a real thing. It really is. And that fear of regret is a huge driver tied in with scarcity as well.
What is default?
Defaults are if you go into any sort of a choice. So when you bought your computer, it had a lot of settings that were created for you, your default settings, and you can choose to do the custom or you can proceed with the default. And if we were to say, do you know how long it takes before your computer transitions over to the screensaver? Probably not. But it's a default setting that was put in place for you. And there are defaults all in our lives that are impacting us all the time that we've just sort of accepted that have been put into place. And also, if you ever have a selection of options where there's, the radio buttons where you can choose if you want to pick A, B, or C, the first item or something that's been pre-selected for you, people are more likely to stick with that default option than they are to move and make a new choice. Where if there was nothing selected, it changes the way that people would choose something on the list.
One of the topics that you talk about in your ebook is size matters. What do you mean by that?
So that is specifically talking about font size on the way that our brains would process the value or importance of something in a price. So very often, if you were going to be setting up tags, let's say, and you were putting something on sale, you would probably think you can either cross out the old price and then say, now the new sale price is this. So if you were to have $10, you would make that small and then say, now it's on sale and it's only $5 or whatever it is. And you think, I want this price to stand out. I want people to see it. What actually happens, though, is that our brains associate that size with price in many cases. And so really, as silly as it is, small font means small price in the way that your subconscious would very quickly make that association. So having when the studies had the sale price in a smaller font than the original price, there were more purchases than in the other way around.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.